At 17, she was sold to the Hell's Angel for being infertile. Everyone said she was broken, unwanted, unlovable, a girl born for nothing but pain. But when the biker who bought her looked into her eyes, he saw something no one else did, a soul still fighting to believe in love. She thought she'd been sold to a monster. He thought he was too far gone to save anyone. But one night, when danger closed in and the world turned against them, his kiss didn't claim her. It changed her. Because sometimes, grace doesn't come from angels in white. It comes from a man in leather who's willing to risk his life for a girl everyone else threw away. Now they're on the run, from the gang that wants her back, and from the past that's trying to destroy them both. When faith meets fire and love is born from ashes, can two broken souls really rewrite what fate decided long ago? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The Arizona sun had long since dipped below the horizon, painting the desert sky in deep purples and fading oranges. In the dimly lit trailer park on Phoenix's outskirts, 17-year-old Emily Grace Hollis sat on her narrow bed, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover of her mother's Bible. The springs beneath her squeaked with each small movement, a familiar sound in the cramped space she called home. Outside, the gravel crunched under heavy boots. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she heard her stepfather Rick's unsteady footsteps, accompanied by the rumble of multiple motorcycles. The door banged open, followed by rough laughter and the sharp smell of whiskey. "Emily!" Rick's voice carried through the thin walls. "Get out here, girl!" Her hands trembled as she tucked the Bible into her worn denim backpack. Emily smoothed down her simple cotton dress and stepped into the narrow hallway. The sight that greeted her made her pause. 5 large men in leather cuts crowded the small living room, their presence making the trailer feel even more cramped than usual. One man stood apart from the others, taller and broader, with deep scars crossing his face like weathered roads on a map. His dark eyes met hers, and unlike the others, his gaze held no malice. This was Cain Reaper Matheson, though Emily didn't know his name yet. Rick swayed on his feet, a mean smile twisting his features. "See what I mean? Pretty enough, but damaged goods." He grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her forward roughly. "Tell them what the doctor said, girl." Emily's cheeks burned with shame. "Please don't," she whispered. "Worthless and infertile," Rick spat out, making Emily flinch. "Can't even do what a woman's supposed to do." He turned to Cain, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. $5,000 in that bag of pills we talked about. She's yours." The room went deadly quiet. Emily's vision blurred with tears as she stared. At the stained carpet, her whole body trembling. She could feel the weight of stairs on her, could sense the tension building in the small space. Cain's voice, when it came, was low and controlled. "Done." Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. The big biker's face remained unreadable, but something in his stance, the way he positioned himself between her and the other men, made her wonder. Rick's grip on her arm loosened as he reached for the envelope Cain held out. "Go pack your stuff," he ordered Emily, already counting the bills. Emily moved in a daze, her feet carrying her back to her tiny room. With shaking hands, she stuffed a few clothes into her backpack alongside the Bible. Through the thin walls, she could hear the men's voices, though she couldn't make out the words. When she returned to the living room, Cain stood waiting while the other bikers filed out. Rick was nowhere to be seen, probably already in his room with his pills. Emily clutched her backpack to her chest like a shield. Cain's voice was surprisingly gentle. "You ever ride in a sidecar?" She shook her head. It's safer than the back of the bike, he explained, leading her outside. The night air was cool against her tear-stained cheeks. A sleek black motorcycle waited, its chrome gleaming under the streetlight. The attached sidecar looked sturdy, if well used. Kane helped her settle into the sidecar, showing her how to position her feet and where to hold on. His movements were efficient but careful, like someone used to handling fragile things. "Hold tight to your bag," he instructed, swinging his leg over the bike's seat. The engine roared to life, and Emily couldn't help looking back at the trailer she'd called home. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Rick's shadow, already hunched over his newly acquired pills. The sight made her stomach turn. As they pulled away, the wind whipping at her hair, Emily clutched her backpack tighter, feeling the familiar shape of her mother's Bible inside. Tears streamed down her face, quickly dried by the desert wind. She didn't know if this broad-shouldered stranger with his scarred face was her salvation or her damnation. But as the trailer park grew smaller in the sidecar's mirror, she sent up a silent prayer. The motorcycle's headlight cut through the darkness, leading them away from everything she'd known. The rumble of the engine thrummed through her body as they rode into the night, her old life disappearing behind them like dust in the wind. Emily huddled deeper into the sidecar, her mind spinning with questions she was afraid to ask. Kane drove steadily, taking turns with care, always mindful of his passenger. Every so often, Emily caught him glancing down at her, checking to make sure she was secure. His expression remained unreadable in the darkness, but his actions, the way he slowed for bumps, how he angled the bike to shield her from the worst of the wind, spoke of something other than ownership. They rode past the city limits, the lights of Phoenix growing dimmer behind them. The desert stretched out on either side, a vast expanse under a star-filled sky. Emily had never seen so many stars. The trailer park's security lights had always dimmed them. Now they sparkled above like scattered diamonds, indifferent to the drama playing out below. The cool night air carried the scent of sage and creosote, so different from the stale cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey that had permeated her old home. Emily's tears had dried, leaving salty tracks on her cheeks. Her fingers, still clutching her backpack, had grown numb from holding on so tightly, but she couldn't make herself relax. The motorcycle's headlight carved a path through the darkness, leading them toward an uncertain future. Emily didn't know where they were going or what would happen when they got there. But as the miles rolled by, one thought kept circling in her mind. She was no longer under Rick's roof, no longer subject to his cruel words and drunken rages. Whether this scarred biker beside her meant to be her captor or her rescuer remained to be seen. But for now, watching her old life disappear in the sidecar's mirror, Emily could only trust in the same faith that had sustained her through years of hardship. Her mother's Bible pressed against her chest, a familiar comfort in a world that had suddenly turned strange and uncertain. The desert night enveloped them, the motorcycle's engine providing a steady rhythm to their journey into the unknown. Emily huddled deeper into the sidecar, her future as vast and mysterious as the star-strewn sky above. The morning sun filtered through thin motel curtains, casting warm stripes across Emily's face. Her eyes fluttered open, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. She found herself fully clothed, wrapped snugly in a rough blanket that smelled of detergent. The events of the previous night crashed over her like a wave. Rick, the bikers, the midnight ride away from everything she'd known. She sat up slowly, taking in the modest motel room. A chair was pulled up against the far wall, where it appeared someone had kept watch through the night. The room showed signs of only one occupant, her. Her backpack sat untouched on the dresser, her mother's Bible still safely inside. Through the window, she could see Kane's broad silhouette. He sat on a plastic chair outside the room, smoke curling up from a cigarette between his fingers. When she stepped outside, the morning air still cool against her skin, he didn't meet her eyes. "Sleep okay?" he asked gruffly, staring at the nearly empty parking lot. "Yes. Thank you." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, uncertain what to say to this man who had both bought and seemingly protected her. "Get your things," he said, crushing out his cigarette. "We need to make a stop." 20 minutes later, they pulled up to a courthouse, its stone facade stark against the morning sky. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as Kane led her inside. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they walked through metal detectors and down long hallways. In a small office, a clerk looked up from her computer, eyebrows raising at the odd pair they made, the scarred biker and the trembling teenager. Kane pulled out paperwork he'd somehow prepared, along with both their identification documents. Emily's world tilted sideways when she saw what they were: marriage license forms. Her name was already typed neatly on the papers, alongside Kane's full name, Kane Matthew Matheson. "What?" she began, but Kane cut her off with a look. "It's the only way they can't touch you," he muttered, his pen scratching against the paper as he signed his name. "Your stepfather, the cops, anyone looking to cause trouble, you'll be legally protected." Emily's hand shook as she took the pen. 17 was old enough to marry in Arizona with parental consent, which Rick had technically given through the transaction. The thought made her stomach turn. The clerk processed their paperwork with bored efficiency, and just like that, Emily Grace Hollis became Emily Grace Matheson. The words felt foreign in her mind, like a language she couldn't quite grasp. They rode north after that, the desert highway stretching endlessly before them. The sidecar felt different now. She was no longer just a passenger, but a wife, though the word seemed impossible to reconcile with reality. The sun was high when they finally turned off the main road, following a dusty path to a sprawling garage complex. Old cars and motorcycles in various states of repair dotted the property. A faded sign read, "Angels Rest Automotive." Several men in leather vests looked up as they approached, their expressions ranging from curiosity to something darker. Emily felt their eyes on her as Kane helped her from the sidecar, their gazes making her skin crawl. "Who's the fresh meat, Reaper?" one called out, a tattooed man with a scraggly beard. Kane's hand tightened on Emily's shoulder. "She's under my protection," he said, his voice carrying a cold warning that made the other men step back slightly. "Since when do you keep pets?" another asked, laughing. Kane's response was immediate and sharp. "She's my wife, and that's all you need to know. Anyone who touches her answers to me." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Emily was shown to a back room behind the garage's office, a simple space with a cot and small bathroom. It wasn't much, but it was clean, and Kane assured her she'd be safe there. As evening approached, voices drifted through the thin walls. Emily sat on her cot, trying to focus on her Bible, but the words of the men outside kept intruding. "Heard she's barren," one voice said, followed by cruel laughter. "What kind of woman can't even have kids? No wonder her old man was willing to sell her off." "Probably why Reaper took her. No risk of complications, if you know." "What I mean." Emily curled into herself, hot tears sliding down her cheeks as she pressed her face into her pillow. Her mother's Bible lay open beside her as she whispered familiar prayers, seeking comfort in the words that had sustained her through so many dark nights. "Lord, give me strength," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Help me understand your plan in all of this." Unknown to her, Kane stood in the shadows of the doorway, having come to check on her. He watched her shoulders shake with silent sobs, heard her whispered prayers, and something long dormant stirred in his chest. The sight of her, so young, so vulnerable, yet clinging to her faith, made his hardened heart ache in a way he hadn't felt since losing Lena. He remembered the cruel words of his men, the casual way they'd dismissed her worth based on her inability to bear children. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, an unfamiliar protective instinct rising within him. For the first time in years, Cain felt something crack in the careful walls he'd built around his heart. This girl, his wife in name only, had awakened something he'd thought long dead: compassion, and perhaps even the faintest glimmer of hope. He watched her a moment longer, this strange angel who'd somehow landed in his care, before silently stepping away. He had demons of his own to wrestle with tonight, and the sound of her quiet prayers followed him into the darkness. The desert night settled around the garage, stars appearing one by one in the vast Arizona sky. Inside her small room, Emily continued to pray, unaware of the change she'd already begun to work in the heart of the man who'd both bought and saved her. The garage transformed slowly over the next few days, like a flower pushing through concrete. Emily moved through the space with quiet determination, scrubbing years of grime from windows and sweeping away layers of desert dust. Her small hands worked methodically, bringing order to chaos one corner at a time. Cain watched from his workbench, pretending to focus on the motorcycle engine before him. But his eyes kept drifting to her slight figure as she worked. She hummed sometimes, old hymns he half remembered from childhood, her voice barely audible above the clang of tools and rough talk of the men. The kitchen area, once a dumping ground for empty beer bottles and takeout containers, now smelled of home-cooked meals. Emily had discovered an ancient hot plate and a few battered pans, somehow creating simple but filling dishes from the meager supplies available at the local store. "You don't have to do all this," Cain had told her on the second day, watching her scrub at a particularly stubborn stain on the counter. She'd looked up at him with those clear eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed walls. "I know," she'd said simply, then returned to her work. That evening, like every evening, she sat on her cot with her worn Bible open on her lap. The torn cover had been carefully mended with tape, the pages dog-eared and marked with penciled notes in the margins. Cain lingered in the doorway, mesmerized by the peace that seemed to settle over her as she read. The sight triggered a memory he'd fought hard to bury. 5 years earlier, Lena had sat in their small apartment, her nurse's uniform traded for comfortable sweats, one hand resting on her growing belly. "We should start thinking about names," she'd said, looking up from her magazine with that smile that had first captured his heart. "Still plenty of time," he'd replied, pulling on his leather jacket. The rival gang had been encroaching on their territory, and he needed to send a message. "Be careful," she'd called after him, worry creasing her forehead. "Remember, you're going to be a daddy soon." But he hadn't been careful enough. The chase had turned deadly, the rival gang forcing them onto dangerous roads. He'd survived the crash that took both Lena and their unborn child, though sometimes he wished he hadn't. The sound of heavy boots pulled Cain from his memories. Troy, one of the younger riders, was approaching Emily's corner of the garage. Something in the way he moved, predatory, deliberate, set off warning bells in Cain's mind. Emily had just finished mopping, her back turned as she wrung out the mop. Troy's shadow fell across her, and she tensed, turning slowly. "Well, well," Troy drawled, backing her against the wall. "Ain't you just the perfect little housewife, making everything all nice and pretty for us?" "Please step back," Emily said quietly, but firmly. Troy laughed, reaching out to touch her face. "Come on, sweetheart. Reaper can't keep you all to himself, especially since we all know you can't give him what a real woman should." Kane moved before he even realized it. One moment he was across the garage, the next he had Troy pinned against the wall, his forearm pressed against the younger man's throat. "I told you she was under my protection," Kane growled, his voice deadly quiet. Years of rage, at losing Lena, at his own failures, at the cruelty of the world, boiled to the surface. His fist connected with Troy's jaw once, twice, 3 times. Blood spattered on the freshly cleaned floor. He pulled back for another strike, lost in a haze of violence. "You're not a monster!" Emily's voice cut through the rage like a shaft of sunlight through storm clouds. The words echoed off the garage walls, hanging in the sudden silence. Kane's fist froze mid-swing. He looked at Emily, really looked at her, and saw not fear, but determination in her eyes. She stood straight, one hand clutching her Bible to her chest like a shield. "You're not a monster," she repeated softly. "Please don't act like one." Slowly, Kane lowered his arm. Troy slumped to the floor, coughing and spitting blood. The other bikers who had gathered to watch melted away, disappointed at the lack of further violence. "Get out," Kane told. "Troy," his voice hoarse. "If I see you near her again, I won't stop." That night, after the garage had grown quiet, Kane dragged an old chair outside Emily's door. He sat there in the darkness, listening to her quiet movements as she prepared for bed. The whiskey bottle at his feet remained unopened. For the first time in years, he wanted a clear head. Through the thin door, he heard her voice, soft but distinct, speaking words that weren't meant for him to hear. "Lord, if you sent him, show him why." Kane closed his eyes, remembering another woman who had once prayed for his soul. But where Lena's death had left him numb, Emily's quiet faith stirred something he thought long dead, a flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in the desert wind. He settled deeper into the chair, prepared to keep his vigil through the night. The garage creaked and settled around him, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. But Kane remained still, guarding the door behind which an unlikely angel slept, her simple prayer still echoing in his mind. The desert sun painted long shadows across the garage floor as another week unfolded. Emily found her rhythm in the daily routines, sweeping floors and organizing tools while the sound of engines and metalwork filled the air. Her movements grew more confident, less like a frightened bird, and more like someone finding solid ground beneath her feet. In the corner where she'd made her makeshift kitchen, Emily arranged mismatched mugs on a wooden crate. The coffee maker, ancient and temperamental, sputtered to life each morning. She'd discovered it buried under old rags, cleaned it meticulously, and now it served as her small contribution to the garage's daily life. Kane noticed the changes in her, the way her shoulders relaxed when she thought no one was watching, the quiet humming as she worked. Small signs of life returning to someone who'd been surviving rather than living. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, Emily approached Kane's workbench. He was bent over a Harley's engine, grease-stained hands working with surprising delicacy on the mechanical heart before him. "Coffee?" she offered, holding out a chipped blue mug. He looked up, caught off guard by the simple gesture. Their eyes met briefly before his gaze dropped to the steaming cup. "Thanks," he said softly, the word rough from disuse but genuine. Emily's smile, small but real, warmed something inside him that had been cold for far too long. The peaceful routine they'd built shattered 3 days later, when the rumble of an unfamiliar engine cut through the afternoon heat. A black van, its windows tinted dark as sin, pulled into the garage's lot. The air grew thick with tension as 3 men emerged. Kane recognized them immediately. Viper, his second in command, led the group. Tall and lean, with snake tattoos coiling up his neck, Viper moved like his namesake, all controlled power and deadly intent. 2 other club members flanked him, their faces set in hard lines. Emily, sensing the shift in atmosphere, retreated to her corner. Kane positioned himself between her and the newcomers, his stance casual but ready. "Well, well," Viper drawled, his eyes sliding past Kane to fix on Emily. "Looks like domestic life suits you, Reaper. What brings you here, Viper?" Kane's voice was neutral, but his fingers twitched near his belt. Viper's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing about paperwork. Been going through the books, and there seems to be a discrepancy." He pulled out a folded paper from his leather jacket. $5,000 was promised for the girl. Our sources say you never paid up." "The deal wasn't with the club," Kane said evenly. "It was personal." "Nothing's personal in this life, brother. You know that." Viper's voice hardened. "The girl belongs to the club now. We're here to reclaim what's ours." One of the other bikers took a step forward, but Kane's glare stopped him cold. "She's my wife," Kane stated, the words ringing with finality. "Legally married. You touch her, you're breaking more than club rules." Viper's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Marriage? Since when did you turn soft, Reaper? That piece of paper won't save either of you." His hand moved to his hip, where metal glinted beneath leather. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Leave," Kane commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Now." For a long moment, the air crackled with potential violence. Then Viper smiled again, all teeth and venom. "Sure, brother, we'll leave. But the club doesn't forget betrayal. Think about that." The black van's engine roared to life, and soon only dust remained where the 3 men had stood. But their threat hung in the air like smoke. Night fell, bringing no peace with its darkness. Kane paced the garage, checking locks, windows, shadows. He knew the club's ways. They would return, and when they did, there would be more of them. A soft glow from the back of the garage caught his attention. Emily knelt in her corner, her Bible open before her, lips moving in silent prayer. The sight stopped him in his tracks. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up as his shadow fell across her, and he saw tears glinting in her eyes. "We have to leave," he said quietly, crouching down beside her. "The club, they won't stop. If we stay here, they'll kill us both." Emily's hands trembled as she closed her Bible. "Where would we go?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. As long as it's far from here." He reached out, hesitating for a moment before gently brushing away a tear from her cheek. "I won't let them hurt you." Then, moved by an impulse he couldn't explain, Kane leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. The kiss was brief, protective, nothing like the violent passion his life had been full of. It felt sacred, like a prayer of his own. "If we die," he whispered against her skin, "you die loved." The words surprised them both. Emily's breath caught, and Kane pulled back, suddenly aware of how close they were. In her eyes, he saw not fear or revulsion, but something that looked dangerously like hope. They worked through the night, gathering essentials. Emily packed her few belongings, clothes, her Bible, a photo of her mother. Kane collected cash, weapons, and supplies, his movements quick and efficient. As the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky, they stood beside his Harley. The motorcycle gleamed in the pre-dawn light, ready for the journey ahead. Emily climbed into the sidecar, clutching her small backpack to her chest. Kane swung his leg over the seat and kicked the engine to life. The Harley's roar echoed off the garage walls, a battle cry against the coming day. Without looking back, They rode into the desert darkness, the wind carrying them toward an uncertain future. The garage grew small in the mirror, then disappeared altogether as the road curved. Emily's prayers mixed with the engine's rumble, and somewhere in the distance, the sun began to rise. The mountain roads twisted like ribbons through the wilderness, carrying Kane and Emily deeper into isolation. The Harley's engine echoed off rocky cliffs as they climbed higher, leaving the desert heat behind. Emily huddled in the sidecar, her arms wrapped around herself against the growing chill. They stopped only when necessary, quick meals at roadside diners where truckers barely glanced their way, and nights at small motels where Kane always requested 2 rooms. If only one was available, he slept in his truck or on the floor, maintaining a respectful distance that spoke louder than words. At a diner on their second morning, Emily watched Kane pour sugar into his coffee, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate paper packet. He caught her looking and offered a slight nod, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for keeping your word." His response was gruff but sincere. "Ain't much of a man if he can't keep his word." By late afternoon on the second day, they turned onto a narrow dirt road that disappeared into thick pine forest. The air grew crisp and sweet with evergreen. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, the trees opened to reveal a clearing where a sturdy log cabin sat like a haven against the wilderness. Smoke curled from the chimney, and on the wide front porch, a woman stood waiting. Marlene Cole was 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a neat braid, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Her face was weathered but kind, marked with laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. "Well, well," Marlene called out as they approached. "If it isn't the Reaper himself, finally remembering where I live." Kane cut the engine, and the mountain silence wrapped around them like a blanket. "Marlene," he said, helping Emily from the sidecar. "We need a place to lay low." Marlene's sharp eyes took in Emily's thin frame and nervous posture. Without hesitation, she opened her arms. "Come here, child. You look like you could use a proper meal and a warm hug." Emily hesitated only a moment before walking into Marlene's embrace. The older woman smelled like fresh bread and wood smoke, and something in Emily's chest loosened at the contact. "I've got venison stew on the stove," Marlene said, keeping an arm around Emily's shoulders, "and plenty of room for both of you." The cabin's interior was rustic but clean, with hand-sewn curtains and well-worn furniture that spoke of comfort rather than luxury. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the smell of stew made Emily's stomach growl. While Kane brought in their bags, Marlene led Emily to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This can be your space," she said, opening a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. "I've got some clothes that might fit you better than those road-worn things." Emily ran her fingers over soft flannel shirts and sturdy jeans. "I couldn't possibly—" "Nonsense," Marlene interrupted kindly. "What's mine is yours while you're here. Now get changed and come eat something. You're far too thin." Over bowls of rich stew and fresh bread, Marlene didn't ask questions about their sudden arrival. Instead, she told stories about her late husband, a former biker who'd found his peace in these mountains before cancer took him 5 years ago. He used to say that sometimes the roughest souls need the quietest places, Marlene said, her eyes meeting Kane's across the table. Days began to flow together like honey, sweet and slow. Emily discovered muscles she never knew she had as Marlene taught her to split wood for the fireplace. The older woman's patience never wavered as she showed Emily how to position the axe, how to let its weight do most of the work. "There you go," Marlene praised as Emily successfully split a log. "Nothing builds confidence like honest work." The garden became Emily's favorite place. Under Marlene's guidance, she learned to tell weeds from herbs, to gauge when tomatoes were perfectly ripe. Her hands, once soft, grew calloused and capable. Cain kept his distance, but remained a constant presence. He spent hours working on Marlene's old pickup truck, the sound of tools against metal a steady rhythm to their days. Sometimes Emily would bring him water or coffee, and though he spoke little, his eyes followed her movements with growing warmth. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire. Marlene would knit or read, while Emily helped prepare meals or worked on mending clothes. Cain sat in an old leather armchair, cleaning gun parts or sharpening knives, but Emily noticed how his attention often drifted to her. The first time Emily laughed, really laughed, was when Marlene's ancient cat knocked over a basket of fresh-picked vegetables, sending tomatoes rolling across the kitchen floor. The sound seemed to startle everyone, including herself, but it broke something loose inside her. After that, smiles came easier, more natural. Cain noticed the change. One evening, as Emily helped Marlene with dishes, he heard her humming an old hymn. The sound stopped him in his tracks, his hands frozen on the truck's engine. Something about her voice, soft and sweet in the gathering dusk, made his chest ache with forgotten feelings. Each night before bed, Emily would leave her Bible on the kitchen table, certain pages marked with careful precision. She never pushed or preached, just left it there like an open door. One night, after Emily and Marlene had gone to bed, Cain sat alone by the dying fire. The Bible lay on the table, its worn cover reflecting the firelight. For a long moment, he just stared at it, this book that seemed to give Emily such peace. Finally, he reached out and picked it up, his rough hands careful with the delicate pages. Opening to a marked passage, he read words about forgiveness, about new beginnings. His finger traced the verses Emily had underlined, wondering what she saw in them that gave her such strength. The fire crackled, throwing shadows on the cabin walls as Cain sat there, holding Emily's Bible, surrounded by the quiet of the mountain night. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf answered. Inside, for the first time in years, something in Cain's heart began to thaw. The mountain mornings brought a different kind of peace. Emily woke early, drawn by the smell of coffee and fresh bread from Marlene's kitchen. The older woman had a way of making every task feel like a lesson in living. "Come here, child," Marlene called one morning, gesturing to the kitchen counter. "Time you learned your way around a proper kitchen." Emily approached tentatively. "I can make sandwiches and heat up soup." Marlene's laugh was warm and rich. "Oh, honey, we're going to do better than that." She pulled out flour, yeast, and salt. "First lesson? Bread. It's like life itself. You need patience, strength, and faith that it'll rise." Over the next few weeks, Emily's hands learned the rhythm of kneading dough, the careful measure of spices, and the satisfaction of creating meals that made both Marlene and Cain's eyes light up with appreciation. But Marlene's lessons weren't confined to the kitchen. One afternoon, she led Emily to the back porch, holding something behind her back. "Every woman needs to know how to protect herself," Marlene declared, revealing 2 cans of pepper spray and a small purple motorcycle helmet. Emily's eyes widened. I don't know about this." "That's why we're learning." Marlene's tone brooked no argument. She demonstrated proper stance, how to hold the pepper spray, and most importantly, when to use it. Aim for the eyes, then run. No hesitation. They practiced with water bottles until Emily's movements became confident and sure. Then Marlene led her to a small Honda motorcycle parked behind the cabin. "It was my granddaughter's starter bike," Marlene explained. "Time someone put it to good use again." Emily touched the bike's handlebar hesitantly. "I've only ever ridden in Kane's sidecar." "Then it's time you learned to ride on your own." Marlene's eyes softened. "Child, love don't make you weak. It gives you teeth. Being protected is good, but being able to protect yourself is better." Day by day, Emily gained confidence on the small bike, starting with circles in the yard before graduating to the dirt road leading to the cabin. Kane watched from a distance, his expression unreadable, but Emily caught him checking the bike's mechanics each evening, ensuring its safety. The nights, however, held different lessons. Emily often woke to muffled sounds from the porch where Kane slept. One particularly bad night, she heard him talking with Marlene in low, broken tones. "I see her face every time I close my eyes." Kane's voice was rough with pain. "Lena, the baby, all that blood. You can't change the past, son." Marlene's voice was gentle but firm. "I don't deserve forgiveness, not from God, not from anyone." "Then stop running from it." Marlene's words carried through the night air. "Grace isn't about deserving. It's about accepting." Emily pressed her hands together in prayer, her heart aching for the man whose protection had saved her, yet who couldn't protect himself from his own demons. The next Sunday morning, Emily discovered a small chapel in town during one of her rides. Its whitewashed walls and simple cross spoke to something deep in her soul. She left a carefully written note on the kitchen table before leaving for the service. "Service at 10 o'clock. You're welcome to join me. Emily." She didn't expect him to come. The chapel filled with local families, and Emily found a spot in the middle, breathing in the familiar smell of wood polish and well-worn hymnals. Then, just as the service began, she heard the back door open. Kane stood there, motorcycle helmet in hand, looking both defiant and lost. He took a seat in the last pew, his large frame seeming to shrink in the sacred space. The service moved through its familiar rhythms until the congregation stood for "Amazing Grace." Emily's voice joined the others, but her attention was drawn to the back of the church. In the sunlight streaming through stained glass, she saw tears tracking down Kane's face, unnoticed and unwiped. After the service, they found a small coffee shop across the street. They sat in comfortable silence, Emily with her tea and Kane with black coffee, watching people pass by the window. "You came," Emily finally whispered, her voice full of wonder. Kane's response was soft, almost shy. "Didn't want you to pray alone." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Emily noticed how Kane's hands, usually so steady on his motorcycle handlebars, trembled slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. She reached across the table and gently touched his wrist, offering the same comfort he'd given her so many times before. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw not the hardened biker who'd bought her freedom, but a man learning, like her, to trust in something bigger than his past. They finished their drinks in peaceful silence, the morning sun warming their shared table, neither needing words to express the shift in their hearts. The ride back to Marlene's was different somehow. Emily on her small Honda, Kane on his Harley. They wound through the mountain roads side by side. When they pulled up to the cabin, Marlene was on the porch, her knowing smile saying more than words ever could. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Emily sat on the porch steps, her Bible open in her lap. Kane worked on his motorcycle nearby, the familiar sounds of his tools a comfortable backdrop to her reading. The distance between them had changed. Not gone, but different. It was as if that morning in the chapel had opened a door neither knew how to close nor wanted to. Marlene brought out cups of hot chocolate, handing them around with a mother's care. As darkness settled over the mountain, The three of them sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, but somehow more connected than ever before. Emily looked at the stars emerging in the darkening sky, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. Her whispered prayer of thanks went unspoken, but not unfelt, carrying on the evening breeze like a promise of better days to come. The mountain air grew warmer as spring crept into summer. Over the passing weeks, Emily and Kane fell into a comfortable rhythm at Marlene's property. The old barn, once filled with cobwebs and forgotten tools, slowly transformed into a modest repair shop. Emily proved to be a quick learner. Her small hands could reach places Kane's couldn't, and she developed a knack for detailed work. She'd hand him tools before he asked, anticipating his needs with an instinct that made him pause and wonder. "You're getting good at this," he said one afternoon, watching her clean a carburetor with careful precision. She smiled, a light blush touching her cheeks. "I have a good teacher." Their days filled with the sounds of metal on metal, the purr of engines coming back to life, and increasingly, the sound of laughter. It started small, a shared look over a stubborn bolt, a quiet chuckle at Marlene's colorful commentary on their work. But soon, Emily's gentle giggles, and even Kane's deep, rusty laugh became regular visitors to the barn. Marlene watched from her porch, noting how Kane's shoulders gradually lost their tension when Emily was near. How Emily's eyes would follow him when he wasn't looking, filled with something more than just trust. They worked on a neighbor's old Triumph one particular evening when dark clouds began rolling over the mountains. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. "Storm's coming," Kane said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Better get inside." They had barely made it to the house when the first drops fell. Thunder cracked overhead, and suddenly the lights flickered once, twice, then died completely. "Well, ain't that just perfect timing?" Marlene muttered, already moving to light candles. "You two mind bringing in some more wood for the fireplace? Something tells me we're in for a long night." Emily and Kane worked quickly in the covered woodshed, passing logs between them. Their hands brushed in the dim light, sending little sparks of awareness through them both. When they finished, Marlene was already settling into her bedroom with a book and a flashlight. "Don't mind me," she called out. "These old bones need their rest. You young folks can keep each other company." The living room glowed softly with candlelight. Emily sat on the old couch, wrapping herself in a quilt as Kane built up the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside felt like a different world, intimate, safe, almost sacred. Kane settled beside her, leaving space between them but close enough to feel her warmth. They watched the flames dance for a while, comfortable in their silence. "Do you ever think about home?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Kane turned to look at her, shadows playing across his face. "Never had much of one to think about." "I used to think home was a place," she continued, "but now I'm starting to think it's more about feeling safe. Feeling—" She paused, gathering courage. "Feeling loved." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Emily's face for a brief moment. Young but wise beyond her years, beautiful in her vulnerability. "I never told you about Lena," Kane said roughly. "About what really happened." Emily stayed quiet, giving him space to find his words. "She was pregnant. 3 months along. We were going to leave the club, start fresh." His hands clenched. "But I had enemies. They ran us off the road. I survived. She didn't. The baby." His voice cracked. "I killed them both, just by loving them." Emily's hand found his in the darkness. "That wasn't your fault." "Everything I touch turns to ash," he said bitterly. You deserve someone clean, Emily, someone whose hands aren't stained with blood." Thunder rolled overhead as Emily shifted closer. Her heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "I love you." The words fell like rain between them. Kane's breath caught. "I love you," she repeated, stronger now. "Not despite your past, but because of who you're becoming. Because you protected me when no one else would. Because you see me, really see me, even when I feel invisible." Lightning flashed again, and Emily stood, moving to face him. "Clean hearts don't save people. God does. And he brought you to me for a reason." Kane looked up at her, his face a battlefield of longing and fear. "Emily." She stepped closer, trembling but determined. "I'm not afraid of your darkness, any more than you're afraid of my brokenness." The candlelight flickered across her face, and something in Kane broke open. He reached for her slowly, giving her time to step away. Instead, she moved closer. His kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, as if he feared she might shatter. But Emily's hands found his shoulders, steady and sure, and the kiss deepened. It tasted of hope and healing, of new beginnings written over old scars. When they finally parted, the storm outside was beginning to fade. Thunder rumbled in the distance, softer now, like a blessing. Emily rested her forehead against Kane's, their breathing synchronized in the quiet. The candles burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. But in that moment, the darkness held no fear, only the promise of dawn waiting to break through the clouds. Emily's fingers traced the lines of Kane's face, memorizing every scar, every story written there. His hands remained gentle on her waist, protective but no longer restraining. They had both stopped running, from their past, from their pain, from the possibility of love. The storm's fury gave way to a gentle rain, its rhythm matching the peace that settled over them. In the soft glow of dying embers and candlelight, they held each other, knowing that everything had changed with that kiss. They were no longer two broken people seeking shelter. They were home. 2 days after their kiss, the mountain air carried the crisp scent of pine and approaching autumn. Emily stood at the cabin window, watching Marlene load her old pickup truck with empty grocery bags. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dirt driveway. "You sure you don't want me to come along?" Emily called out, but Marlene waved her off with a knowing smile. "You two stay put. I'll be back before dark with enough supplies to last us through the week." Marlene's truck rumbled to life, kicking up dust as she headed down the mountain road. Emily returned to the kitchen where Kane was fixing a leaky faucet. Their eyes met briefly, still shy after their kiss, but warmer now, like they shared a precious secret. The afternoon passed quietly as they worked side by side, Emily preparing dinner while Kane finished repairs around the cabin. As sunset painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, Emily was washing dishes when she first heard it, the distant rumble of motorcycles. Her hands froze mid-scrub. Kane appeared in the doorway, his face hard with recognition. "Get away from the windows," he ordered softly, already moving to check the locks. The engines grew louder, multiple bikes approaching fast. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as headlights swept across the cabin walls. Through the window, she counted 5 motorcycles emerging from the tree line, Viper in the lead, his chrome bike gleaming like a serpent's scales. "They found us," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible over the thundering engines. Kane pulled her close, his body tense. "Whatever happens, stay inside." But before either could move, something glass shattered against the porch. Orange flames erupted, spreading across the wooden planks with frightening speed. Viper's laugh carried through the night air, cruel and sharp. "Come out and play, Reaper," he shouted. or we'll smoke you both out." Kane's jaw clenched. He grabbed Emily's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "There's a trap door in the pantry. Get down there and don't come out until—" "I'm not leaving you," she cut him off, her voice stronger than she felt. The front door splintered under heavy boots. Kane pushed Emily behind him as Viper and 2 other bikers burst in, leather-clad shadows backlit by the burning porch. "Found yourself a nice little love nest, didn't you?" Viper sneered, his teeth glinting in the firelight. "Time to pay up, brother." Kane moved first, his fist connecting with Viper's jaw in a brutal crack. The fight exploded through the cabin, fists and boots, crashes and curses. Emily pressed against the wall, her heart in her throat as she watched Kane take on 3 men at once. He was holding his own until 2 more bikers rushed in. 5 against 1. Emily saw brass knuckles flash, heard the sickening crunch as they connected with Kane's ribs. He stumbled, and they swarmed him like wolves. Something snapped inside Emily. Without thinking, she grabbed a wine bottle from the counter and smashed it against the table edge. The broken glass felt dangerous in her hand, but her voice rang out clear and strong. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" She advanced on the nearest biker, the jagged bottle extended. "The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" The man hesitated, thrown off by this small girl quoting scripture while brandishing broken glass. It gave Kane the opening he needed to throw off one attacker, but Viper's boot caught him in the chest, sending him crashing into the coffee table. Emily's voice rose above the chaos. "When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall." Blood streaked Kane's face as he struggled to stand. Emily saw Viper pull something from his jacket, brass knuckles glinting dully in the firelight. She screamed as they connected with Kane's temple, watching in horror as his legs buckled. Then, like an answer to prayer, police sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered through the trees. "Cops!" one of the bikers shouted. "We gotta go!" Viper spat on Kane's motionless form. "This ain't over." He turned to Emily, his eyes cold. "Keep praying, little girl. You'll need it." The bikers fled into the night, engines roaring as they disappeared down the mountain. Emily rushed to Kane, pulling his bloodied head into her lap. His breathing was shallow, face swollen and cut. "Kane, please open your eyes," she begged, tears falling onto his cheeks. The porch continued to burn, casting wild shadows across the destroyed living room. Emily heard tires on gravel, Marlene's truck skidding to a stop outside. "Oh, dear God!" Marlene gasped from the doorway, taking in the scene. She rushed to call emergency services while Emily cradled Kane's head, her fingers finding Marlene's rosary beads in her pocket. "Please, Lord," she prayed aloud, her voice breaking. "Don't take him from me. He's finally trying. He's learning to love again. Please." She wrapped the rosary around their joined hands, rocking slightly as she continued to pray. The fire crackled outside, sirens wailed closer, but Emily kept her vigil. As the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky, her trembling voice lifted in song. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Her voice cracked but didn't stop, the hymn floating out into the breaking day like a desperate hope. Marlene joined her softly, their voices twining together over Kane's still form as red and blue lights finally flooded the mountain clearing. "I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see." The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the sterile room as Kane's eyes fluttered open. Harsh fluorescent lights made him squint, and every breath felt like fire in his ribs. Through blurred vision, he made out Emily's small form curled up in a plastic chair beside his bed, her Bible open in her lap. "You're awake," she whispered, leaning forward. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but relief brightened her tired face. "We've been so worried." "How long?" His voice came out rough, throat dry from disuse. 2 days, Emily said, reaching for a cup of water with a straw. She held it carefully to his lips. "The doctor said you had 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and too many bruises to count." As consciousness fully returned, so did the memory of that night, the burning porch, Viper's sneering face, Emily's voice rising strong above the chaos. Kane tried to sit up, but winced at the sharp pain in his side. "Easy," Emily cautioned, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You need to rest." The door opened, and Marlene walked in carrying a thermos. "Well, look who finally decided to join us," she said, her gruff voice warm with relief. "Brought you some real soup, not that hospital garbage." Emily helped adjust Kane's bed so he could sit up slightly. The simple movement left him dizzy and frustrated by his own weakness. But when Emily spooned the first bit of soup to his lips, he didn't protest. Her hands were steady, her movements careful. "The cabin," he started to ask. "Insurance will cover most of it," Marlene said, settling into a chair. "But I'm not staying there anymore. My friend Sarah's got a spare room in Prescott. Figure it's time for a change anyway." Between spoonfuls of soup, Emily began reading from her worn Bible, her voice soft but clear. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." The familiar words of Psalm 23 washed over him like cool water. Kane closed his eyes, letting Emily's voice anchor him against the pain and uncertainty. He'd never been much for religion, but there was something in her faith that reached past his defenses. Later that afternoon, 2 police investigators entered the room. One was tall and lean, the other shorter with salt and pepper hair. They introduced themselves as Detectives Martinez and Cooper. "Mr. Matheson," Martinez began, "we need to discuss your involvement with the Hells Angels, specifically regarding recent criminal activities under Victor Viper Rodriguez's leadership." Kane felt Emily's hand slip into his. He squeezed it gently, drawing strength from her presence. The time for running was over. "I'll tell you everything," he said quietly. "About the drug running, the protection rackets, all of it. But I want a deal." Cooper raised an eyebrow. "What kind of deal?" "Reduced charges in exchange for testimony. I'll help you bring down Viper's whole operation." Kane's voice grew stronger. "But Emily stays protected, and Marlene too." The detectives exchanged looks. "We'll need to verify your information," Martinez said. "But if it checks out, we can work something out. Witness protection might be necessary." "No," Emily spoke up suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "We're not hiding anymore. Doing right hurts, but it heals. That's what faith is about, standing in the light, even when it's hard." Kane studied her face, seeing not the frightened girl from the trailer park, but a woman of quiet strength. She was right. He'd spent too long in the shadows. The next week passed in a blur of medical checks, police interviews, and careful healing. Emily rarely left Kane's side, except when Marlene insisted she get proper rest. She read to him, helped with physical therapy exercises, and simply sat with him in comfortable silence. Finally, the doctors cleared him for release under strict orders to take it easy. The police arranged for supervised release with regular check-ins and restrictions on travel. Already Kane's testimony was causing ripples through the club. 3 members had turned themselves in, and Viper's iron grip was beginning to crack. "I found us a place," Emily told him as they left the hospital. "It's small, but it's clean and quiet. About an hour south in Oracle. The landlady goes to my new church." The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a converted house, with worn carpet but good light. Emily had already moved in their few belongings, his tools, her Bible, some clothes and necessities Marlene had helped gather. "Look," Emily said, pointing above the door. A simple wooden cross hung there, dark wood against white paint. "For protection," she explained with a small smile. Kane touched the cross gently. He thought of another piece of wood, the broken bat he'd used in his first gang fight at 16. How far he'd come from that angry boy. "You need to rest," Emily insisted, steering him toward the bedroom. "Doctor's orders." The bed was made with fresh sheets, and through the window he could see the desert mountains in the distance. Emily helped him settle against the pillows, mindful of his healing ribs. "I don't deserve this," he murmured, catching her hand. "Any of it. You." Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her free hand touching his scarred cheek. "Grace isn't about deserving," she said softly. "It's about accepting love when it's offered. About letting light into the dark places." Kane pulled her closer, careful of his injuries, and pressed his forehead to hers. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing together, while outside their window desert birds sang welcome to a new day. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, they sat on their small balcony. Emily had made tea, and the warm cup felt good in Kane's hands. The world felt different here. Fragile, maybe, uncertain in many ways, but full of possibility. "What happens now?" he asked, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Emily leaned against his good side, her head resting on his shoulder. "We heal," she said simply. "We build something new. Together." The cross above their door caught the last rays of sunlight, casting a long shadow across the threshold. But shadows didn't frighten Kane anymore. Not with Emily's quiet strength beside him. Not with the chance to make things right. They sat in peaceful silence as evening settled over the desert town, two souls finding refuge in each other's presence, in the promise of tomorrow's light. Life settled into a gentle rhythm as summer faded into fall. Kane found work at Randy's auto shop, where his skilled hands and quiet dedication earned respect from customers and co-workers alike. The owner appreciated having someone who could handle everything from classic cars to modern hybrids. Emily discovered her calling at New Hope Women's Shelter. 3 days a week, she sat with women who carried stories similar to her own. She served coffee, listened without judgment, and shared her faith when asked. The shelter director noticed how even the most traumatized survivors opened up to Emily's gentle presence. Their evenings became a sanctuary. Emily would cook simple meals, meatloaf, pasta, or her improving attempts at homemade bread. They'd eat at their small kitchen table, sharing stories about their day. Before bed, Emily would read from her Bible while Kane listened, his calloused hands busy with small repair projects. One October morning, as Emily prepared breakfast, the room began to spin. She grabbed the counter, but her legs gave way. Kane caught her before she hit the floor. "I'm taking you to the clinic," he said, his voice tight with worry. "No arguments." The waiting room was quiet, except for a children's show playing softly on the television. When Dr. Martinez called them in, she ran several tests before breaking into a warm smile. "Congratulations," she said. "You're pregnant?" Emily stared at her, uncomprehending. That's not possible. I was told I couldn't." "Well, someone was wrong. You're about 8 weeks along and everything looks healthy." Tears spilled down Emily's cheeks as years of shame and hopelessness washed away. The word infertile had been a chain around her heart since childhood. Now it shattered like glass. Kane wrapped his arms around her, his own eyes wet. "God just proved them all wrong," he whispered into her hair. "All of them." That evening, they sat on their bed, looking at the ultrasound picture. "Grace," Emily said softly. Her name is Grace." "Perfect," Kane agreed, his voice rough with emotion. Later, after Emily had fallen asleep, Kane knelt beside their bed for the first time in his life. His hands, scarred from years of fighting and working on engines, clasped together awkwardly. "God," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you gave me more than I ever deserved. Thank you for redemption. Thank you for grace." Outside their window, stars scattered across the desert sky like diamonds on velvet, witnesses to a miracle born of love and faith. The spring sun warmed the freshly painted sign that read, "Second Chances Auto Repair." 6 months had transformed the old warehouse into something special. Where rust and shadows once ruled, hope now lived in every corner. Kane stood in the doorway, watching 2 teenage boys tackle their first oil change. "Easy there, Jake," he called out, his voice firm but kind. "Remember to double-check the filter seal." These kids, who'd been heading down dark paths, now had grease-stained hands instead of trouble-marked futures. Emily sat at a folding table near the office, her Bible open as 5 young women leaned in close. Her growing belly made a perfect shelf for her notes as she shared stories of redemption. The girls, some from the shelter where she still volunteered, found strength in her words and warmth in her smile. On the garage's west wall, a mural spread its wings. Kane had surprised everyone with his hidden talent, painting angel wings that seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Each feather took shape under his patient brush, the same hands that once dealt pain, now creating beauty. "Lord have mercy, look at this place!" Marlene's voice rang out as she pushed through the door, balancing 2 fresh-baked pies. Her face beamed with pride as she set them down. "My kids are doing just fine," she announced to anyone within earshot, making Emily blush, and Kane duck his head with a small smile. The bell above the door chimed again. This time Troy stood there, looking smaller without his club colors. "I left them," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I want to help, if you'll let me." Kane studied his former brother in arms, remembering their violent past. Then he walked forward and extended his hand. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said quietly. "That's what this place is about." Together they began planning a youth mentorship program, their shared past becoming a bridge to others' futures. The garage hummed with activity, tools clanking, voices laughing, prayers lifting. It wasn't just a business. It was a sanctuary where broken things and broken people found healing. Emily watched it all from her seat, one hand resting on her belly, feeling baby Grace kick as if in approval. This was their miracle, not just the child within her, but the family they'd built around them. A home fashioned from forgiveness and grace. Winter crept into Arizona with unusual gentleness, dusting the desert landscape with a rare blanket of snow. The night Emily went into labor, crystalline flakes danced in the glow of streetlights as Kane helped her into their pickup truck. "Hold on, sweetheart," he murmured, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles as they navigated the treacherous roads. Emily breathed through contractions, clutching her Bible close while Kane whispered prayers he'd learned from her. The hospital halls echoed with their footsteps as nurses whisked Emily away. Hours ticked by, marked only by Kane's nervous pacing and the soft beeping of monitors. When Emily's cry pierced the night, Kane's heart stopped. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing their daughter in Emily's arms. Tears streamed down Kane's face as he approached, his hands trembling as he reached for his child. The tiny bundle, wrapped in pink, opened her eyes to meet his. "Guess God had the last word," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. The doctors had said Emily could never have children, but here was their miracle, perfect and whole. As Emily drifted to sleep, Exhausted but radiant, Cain bent down and pressed his lips to her forehead, just as he had that frightening night when they'd fled the gang. But this kiss held no fear, only peace and gratitude. Through the hospital window, dawn painted the sky in gentle pinks and golds. Months passed like a beautiful dream. On a crisp morning, they stood before their expanded business, now bearing a new sign: Second Chances Auto and Hope Center. Emily cradled baby Grace, who cooed softly in her blanket. Cain's arm encircled them both, protecting his precious family. Their lips met in a tender kiss, so different from their first, yet carrying all the power of their journey. That desperate kiss in the storm had started something extraordinary, transforming two broken souls into living proof that love, faith, and second chances could work miracles. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.